Hey guys, I've been out in the shop a lot lately, polishing some aluminum. I've got a 1975 Suzuki RE5 that I'm polishing the side covers on. And while I was at it, I had to order some new supplies because some of my wheels were getting a little ratty and needed some more compound and stuff. So I figured I'd put together a video and share with you some of the things I've learned over the years of doing this, some of the common mistakes, some of the equipment that you need, you may or may not need, and some of the difference in the pieces that you're going to run into. I won't be doing any actual polishing in this video, just kind of show you where to start and go from there. And that's one of the biggest questions that I get. A lot of my buddies bring me parts by and they want me to polish for them. And it's where do you start on this? And I'm telling them, it's just every part is different. You've got everything from a really shiny piece that's in pretty good shape that you might want to just put a touch up on for maybe you're going to a show or whatever. It's just gotten a little hazy from age, so that's going to be different than a part that's it's fairly rough. It's still fairly clean, doesn't have a lot of pitting, maybe a few scratches on. So the starting place on that is going to be a little bit different. And then you go all the way to what I consider the worst case scenario, which is this piece. This piece has been left out, and I think I got this bike from Mobile, Alabama. So it was exposed to salt air and a lot of corrosion, and so this is going to be a difficult piece to get to close to a mirror shine like this. So that's when you need different equipment like this to get it there. But don't let this fool you. You can do most of this stuff, actually all of it, by hand. It's just going to take a long time. That's when things like this come into play. It's a time saver. But anyway, we'll start with the worst case scenario and just show you start to finish what you're going to run into. So I'm going to take the camera off the tripod and walk around and show you some stuff. Kind of give you a close-up over these three pieces that we're talking about. Obviously, this is the worst one. You can just see just a tremendous amount of corrosion on it. This one is a little bit better. And interesting enough, this is a factory piece, and you can still see some of the yellow varnish coating that they put on it from the factory. A lot of your Japanese motorcycles will come with that coating on it, and it starts to turn yellow over time, and you can kind of see that if the light's just right, and it just gives it a bad look. So typically you have to get that off before you can start polishing. And then on something like this hadn't gone through the final polish yet. You can still see some marks in it or whatnot, but it's got a little bit more work to go, but it's getting close. On something like this is what I'm talking about. This is the exact same part off of the Suzuki RE5. These are oil pump covered cases, and on this part, it's in decent shape. A little bit of degreaser, a little bit of stripper to get the varnish off, paint stripper, and you're good to go. You can start with some sandpaper, work your way up to the polishing wheels, and that should turn out to be a pretty nice piece. This is going to take quite a bit more work. Still basically the same starting point. You need to get it clean. So start with a degreaser. At this point, I'm going to say most of the varnish has gone off of this. So we're gonna get it clean and then start with the sandpaper. What I've learned over the years is a lot of people will get these. I'll walk down here and show you. They'll get a aluminum polishing kit that you can get off of eBay or online or whatever, and they're great. It's basically the same thing as this. This is just made for people who do it a lot more. You're getting I think those are 2-pound bars or something like that. But anyway, you get this, you get a crummy part like that, and you go ahead and start polishing it with your different wheels, and you never get a mirror finish on it. It's dull, it's it's speckled looking, it's got dark blotches in it. And what that is when the aluminum corrodes like that, it produces a coating of aluminum oxide. And aluminum oxide actually protects the aluminum. That's why aluminum is so good for stuff outdoors. Unlike steel, uncoated aluminum actually protects itself by forming a layer of aluminum oxide. And if you've heard the term aluminum oxide before, it's because if you'll notice, this is 150 grit sandpaper, and it is made out of aluminum oxide. Why do they use aluminum oxide? It is an extremely hard material, and because of that, it makes polishing stuff like this, or it can make polishing stuff like this, a nightmare. You've got to get all that stuff off, and as you start taking layers of this stuff off, you're going to start seeing discolored aluminum. And like I said, we'll in another video we'll go into actually polishing. I'll actually do this exact piece and show you what you start to look for, and why it's so crucial to to not skip a step in the process, because that's where your that's where your mirror shine is going to come from, by starting the process and carrying it all the way out to the end. So basically, where do you start? Well, on this piece, you're going to start down here with personally I would start probably at a maybe a 120 grit on this piece. You could go a little bit finer. You wouldn't need anything like I don't think you would need anything like an 80 grit or anything. That may be a little bit too extreme. And typically what I'd use is on this, and in larger pieces like this that have a lot of flat areas, use a sanding block, because if you use a sanding block, it's going to keep the workpiece level, and that really comes into play when you're trying to get a mirror shine, because basically how a mirror works is it reflects all the light. Well, when you reflect light off of a perfectly flat surface, you get a really nice sheen. When you reflect it off of a surface that has waves in it, and where the waves come from a lot of times, and I know you can't do this on all the pieces you work on, but let's say that you're taking a piece of paper and you're sanding this by hand. Well, with this piece right here, I've just created 3 ridge points, which are where my fingers are, and in between those ridges, you're not getting the same amount of pressure on the paper, so you can cause distorted areas in your workpiece. So it's something to keep in mind, that if you can use a sanding block like this, it just makes for a nicer finished product. So that being said, I hand sand a lot of my stuff, but I also use, just because I've been doing it for so long, I'll also use some, it's what I call cheats. Basically, it's just tools that help you speed up the process. And like any tool, it's great if you know how to use it and when to use it. Pneumatics save me hours of work. But you can also screw up a piece pretty quick if you don't know what you're doing. So that's why I always suggest try a practice piece first. Just get an old piece of junky aluminum that's been laying outside and practice with the equipment that you're wanting to use, and see what type of finishes it leaves. How you can get in trouble with it. Is it really hard on the edge? Does it erode the edge? Does it cause gouging, lines, stuff like that? And just know that if that's going to do it on your practice piece, it's going to do it on your finished piece. So just understand, that practice is going to help you identify those problems. Here recently, I've really gotten into using the 3M Roloc disc. This is my 3M angle grinder with the Roloc disc adapter on it. And I've currently got a bristle brush on it. But these things are neat. You can get them with just a standard sandpaper in several different grits. I think that's 180 grit. And then you've got the Scotch-Brite wheels, which I think that's coarse and like a medium and a fine. And those are nice, especially the Scotch-Brite wheels, because they're not as aggressive as, say, sandpaper, and they won't leave typically circular lines in your workpiece like a sandpaper would do, and they're a little flexible, so they can kind of contour around the workpiece a little bit, and they work good for just your first initial cleanup. And I'm talking about doing a piece like this, it's really rough. Now on something like this or even this, you would never need to use anything like this. This, basically, you're not going to need to use sandpaper on a piece like this at all. Basically, you just go straight down to your polishing wheels, and you can skip all this initial stuff. This stuff down here is all worst case scenario, where you're either working with a cast piece, like a motorcycle frame, something that may have never been polished before, or a piece like this has just been left out in the elements and it's just in really poor condition. So that's when the sandpapers and your Roloc disc and things like that come into play. Something that I just picked up, I've been using these for maybe about a year now, are these 3M bristle disc Roloc wheels, and you can see how flexible those bristles are. And the neat thing about this is these have the grit embedded into the bristles. Basically in this whole plastic piece has got grit in the bristles. So as the bristles wear away, it exposes more grit, and you can run these bristles down to basically nothing. And they hold up really well. This one I've used for quite some time, done several pieces with it, and it's still basically got all of its bristle length left, and it's held up really well. I was surprised with it. But where those things come into play is your contour areas. Places where, trying to hand sand an area like that, or an area in here, it's time consuming. It's hard to get to, and something like that can make quick work out of it. And it's not real harsh on your edges. Don't spend a lot of time around the edges. But little places like that, crevices, it does a good job of getting in there and getting all that corrosion off. Where you can imagine how long it would take to try and dig all that out with sandpaper. So just something that saves you time. So once you get it basically prepped, whether you're using these, your Scotch-Brite disc, your flap wheels, whatever the part dictates, and whatever grit you start out with, then that's when you start moving up the line. Basically, you're not trying to remove any more corrosion at that point. You're just trying to undo the damage you did with this coarse sandpaper. So in a case like this, when I've started out with the coarse sandpaper, now I got to get those scratches out. But because of that was the only way I could get that stuff off, but it caused damage to the piece. So now you start working your way up, and each one of these sandpapers is finer. We're starting out with a 120 grit. We go up to a 240. I think this is a 320, 360, 400, 600, and then a lot of people stop. I mean, personally, I stop at the 600 because I feel that's a good transition point for your rouges to take over. Like if you go from a 600 to a black emery compound, which we'll get into that in a minute, that's going to be a similar grit as far as the next stage in polish. Other people will tell you, no, go ahead and go from the 6 to the 8 to 1,000, 1,500 to 2,000. And, and you can do that, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's more time consuming. It may or may not give you a better polish. Personally, I can't tell a difference. That's why I stopped with about a 6. But like I said, there's nothing wrong with going that route as high as you want to go. But once you get to this stage, wherever you decide to stop, then you're pretty much ready for your buffing wheels. And you need to, at that point, you need to clean your part off and get any grit that's left off, blow it off, whatever, and then get into your buffing wheels. And like I said, all this stuff's new because I just got it in. The wheels that I've got on my buffer now, and I've got several more in a box over there. But they're getting kind of ratty, and since I'm starting a new project, I want to go ahead and get some new wheels coming. So I've got 3 different types of wheels laid out here. And there again, these wheels are kind of like, the different grits of sandpaper, in that, each of these wheels does a different thing. And you may not need to use all 3 of these wheels on your finished piece. Like if I'm starting out with this piece, which is pretty close to being done, I'm not going to use this wheel. I may start with this wheel and move up to this wheel, but I'll explain that as we go. So basically what you're looking at is here I've got what's called a sisal wheel, a sewn sisal wheel, and it's sandwiched in between just a couple of cloth discs. And I'll try and do a close-up on that. But you can see that's a really coarse, it's sisal rope or manila rope, and it's just really, really coarse. It's kind of like the texture of like a coarse brush, like a hairbrush. And that really does a lot of cutting. That combined with like a black emery compound, which is a coarse compound, you're going to get some aggressive cutting, and you know, in a pretty short amount of time, you're going to cut you know, into some fine scratches and things like that. And you know, so there again, that's where it's important to go ahead and start with a test piece so that you know what each effect of these wheels and these compounds have on a piece that you're working on before you start with your finished piece. And you know, in a case like this, it may be a very hard to get piece. You don't want to ruin it because you might not be able to replace it. So you know, your coarser cutting, I typically start with a sisal wheel. They also have some you know, coarser, you know, rope wheels that are even worse than this. Typically, I've found that most of that can be cured with your sandpaper phase before you get into this. So if I've got a piece that's still got some you know, some sand marks in it, some light scratches and stuff, I'll start with this. Or if I've got a piece possibly like this one, and felt like it was, you know, a candidate where you may not need to go to the sanding stage, you could start with a sisal wheel in the emery compound. Once you get the varnish removed from it, you could possibly start with that and get some pretty decent results. And then from there, I've got a sewn cotton wheel, and you can see that the wheel is sewn. And the difference of that, these two wheels are basically the same. They're made out of the same material. This is a loose wheel. The only place where it's anchored is here in the middle. And then this is sewn all the way out pretty much to the edge. The difference is the spine that's going to give you toward your workpiece. This you're going to be able to put more pressure on because of the sewing in it, gives it more backbone. This, as you can see, is just a really soft, light pressure. It won't take a lot of pressure on it before it starts folding over. And each one of those wheels have their places. Typically, you know, I'll progress through them from coarse to, you know, the finest here in doing my finished stages of polishing. But you could also use a wheel like this, or even this, with a coarse compound, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. You know, on a piece like this, you've got a lot of small crevices here that you're trying to get into. This might conform to those shapes better than, you know, definitely this hard wheel, because it's just not going to get in there. This might work a little bit better, but this may be the best of all. So it just depends on what the workpiece is that you're trying to do. Now, one thing I can say about that, and you're probably wondering why I've got these labeled, is don't cross-contaminate your wheels with different compounds. Don't use the black and then come back with the white on it and expect to get a mirror finish, because you've still got the coarse compound embedded in this wheel. So you're going to get to a finished stage, and you're going to go, man, it's just not looking as you know, as like chrome as I thought it would, and that's because you've got a contamination problem. So, you know, especially on your finer rouges, your white, and if you're doing stainless or something like that with the other compounds, have a dedicated wheel for each one of those. And these wheels are pretty cheap. I mean, I think, you know, $6-7 for a wheel like that. And what I always do is just label them when I get them in. That way I know. And, you know, I always had a label side out. That way I can look on the buffer and go, oh, that's my white rouge wheel. So I put white rouge on it. And it only takes just a few seconds to swap them out. And, you know, and then you can have a different wheel. So if you want to use a loose wheel like this with an emery compound, just mark it with the black compound, and that way you know that that's your go-to wheel for that. So once you've got your part moved up through all these stages, you know, and you're finishing out with the white compound, you know, hopefully you're going to get a finished part that's getting close to this. Like I said, this has got another stage to go to it. But you're always going to run into problem areas that you just can't get with that. That's great for, on this particular piece, that was great for about 90% of the work piece. But you're going to have the problem areas that, like here in your bolt holes and things like that. And that's when the smaller buffs come into play. And I've got this chucked up in a drill. Typically I'll use one of the pneumatic die grinders down there to do that. And basically the same program on that. Pick your compounds the same way. Have dedicated wheels for the compounds, and here you've got just several different shapes, and there's many, dozens of different styles than even I've got laid out here. But typically that's, and I've got some more in the drawer over there. But that takes care of 90% of the problems that I run into as far as that. And that's also the most time consuming is, the detail work on trying to get down into the bolt holes and oblong shaped pieces, just stuff that just has weird contours. And that's where you're going to spend a lot of your time. But, that's where the show quality comes out and you get the best finished product. So hopefully I've answered some of your questions. And like I said, I'm going to do another video on actually polishing that rough piece down there and see how it turns out. Hope you enjoyed watching. Thanks.